can give.
Cool. We're
just
here
waiting for
in a call with current GitLab team members who have a side project, went through the CEO Shadow program, saw me give advice to external companies from time to time if we can live stream it, and they wanted some feedback on their project OpTonal. Take it away, Mike.
Cool. Thank you, Sid. Yeah, so I guess some background on our end is, last year we had a very positive experience in the CEO Shadow program. So Shawn and I both had the opportunity to participate. And one thing that led to is just us wanting to just do something fun on the side together, work on something, tackle a challenge. And so one thing that we were interested in was actually tone and how tone impacts conversation. How does it impact sales? Does it impact sales? So we had this sort of question and we hypothesized that it might. And it works out that we're both in sales. So we have a network of different people that we could talk to and run some of this stuff by. Now, it turns out that nobody, although they're interested like we are in understanding if tone certainly impacts sales, it wasn't a priority. And what was ramping sales reps, especially remote and especially entry level when it came to a more technical product. That seemed to be sort of the recurring theme we saw across 10, 15 conversations. And so we kind of took that back and it's kind of interesting. We see this same thing, it's onboarding, coincidentally, I was an entry-level salesperson starting at GitLab in 2018 and ramping at a fully remote company before it was cool. And we just kind of thought, how did we do that effectively? Because, I certainly was able to ramp very quickly. And the way we did it is essentially just calling each other team members, and literally just simulating conversations with prospects, answering objections, practicing our pitch, practicing, different scenarios. And so we thought, is there a way to take that solution and empower it with technology? Because it's certainly not too scalable, calling all of your team members throughout the day and after hours. But is there a way we can power this with technology and scale it and automate it in a way? And so that's essentially where we came up with OpTonal, which is essentially, we want to create a platform to allow people to simulate conversation and potentially, work on product knowledge, work on pitches, because I think the worst thing that can happen is, the first time you're pitching or sharing something live is with a potential customer. Shawn, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think we've identified that some of our biggest two challenges are going to be, of course, in raising money, and how do we go about that at some point, and then our technical know-how, our expertise, or lack thereof. Mike and I are both in sales, so we are not developers, and we're not that technical person that's going to build out that roadmap or anything like that. So those are the areas in which we were hoping to get some of your thoughts and advice around.
Cool. Maybe the shadows should talk about what they're doing since yesterday, because I think that relates to the original vision of this, but I think it's funny that this is happening since yesterday.
So what we've been doing since yesterday, we have been, let's see, most of today was a lot of internal meetings, and we've been working on some handbook updates and usually a lot of note taking. So that was another thing. Sid, were you? I'm not following your direction there in terms of if you want me to cover something specific.
Can you talk about the P score you're assigning since yesterday?
The
positivity score.
Oh, the positivity score. Gotcha. That's on the P score. Okay, I'm tracking
tone on how the meeting goes, the vibe of the meeting, and the positivity score around it. So for the last few meetings, we've been rating. Everybody gets super excited to rate their big boss, but we're rating on the positivity and how Sid's positivity of the meeting. And so far, all excellent scores.
Yeah, I think it's particularly in feedback. So I think Sid asked us originally to focus on feedback, on how he's giving feedback to people during meetings.
So I want to, because I give a ton of direct feedback, and it's important to relate that with the right tone, and I don't always do that right. And so I'm asking the shadows to rate me. So if you would have built the original product, I would have loved to be a customer if that works within all our rules and everything else, because I'm now having the shadows do that exact work. And I think there's a space for a product that doesn't like transcribe it and then looks at the words, but that actually like the tone with which things are said. I think that's interesting.
Well, think about it. It's not what you say, it's how you say it most of the time, right? We actually, when Mike and I first came up with this, we thought of you actually, because I don't know if you remember, but it was one of your coaching sessions with your CEO coach, and he was asking if you receive feedback well, and you're like, I don't know, Shadows, do I? And you asked me, and I was like, I think sometimes you could be a little bit intimidating, and you took the feedback really well, and you're like, yeah, I do that well, right? But I think what we've seen in regards to tonality is that it's ahead of the curve on people who can communicate, right? Like, it's not something that people are aware of until they're aware of it, right? So by practicing and building in best practices into communication through this type of simulation environment, it will help people become aware of it. Not everybody's aware of tone, pacing, the actual words that you use, your body language, etc. So we're like going to use this simulation platform to essentially coach people or trick people into being aware of, hey, maybe if I use tonality a little bit better, maybe if I pause at the right moments, I can relate better to other human beings, and we can have a better type of relationship. And we've seen the first way to start out with that would be sales, onboarding sales. If we can cut people down from 6 months to ramp to 3 months, because we can help them simulate these things faster, then we're going to not only make an impact in the enterprise, but hopefully maybe even, the consumer level as well.
Cool. The second thing I want to highlight is, well, first of all, I love the website. It looks beautiful. So well done. There's a bunch of tools like this, and I'm very familiar with one called Train Tool from a Dutch company, because my wife worked there. But I know they have kind of US-based competitors as well. So they're kind of online role-playing, peer-to-peer feedback, video training space is hip and happening, and it's good and bad news. The good news is there's totally a market for your product. The bad news is there's a lot of companies in there. So you got to think about what you can offer that other people can't. And then the third question about fundraising, I think it won't be new to you, because both of you have been in sales, but like revenue growth solves all problems. So I think most of the time it helps. Sometimes if you become good at fundraising and the pitch and things like that, but revenue growth is far more important than anything else there. So I'd focus on that over fundraising, unless you need funding now to continue. And then the fourth point is, like, we don't have the technical skills, super common, but also something you should address early on. It happens that there's founding teams who get financing who don't have a technical co-founder, but it is rare. So I've actually, and it's super hard to convince other people to do it. So the weird thing is that learning programming yourself, although very difficult, seems to be a more worthwhile, tends to be more successful in trying to find a technical co-founder. Now, growth solves all problems. So if you're able to contract something out, make traction, get investment, you'll be able to attract someone off that. But it's very hard if you don't have revenue, you don't have traction, to find a technical co-founder willing to join. It would have to be someone in your kind of personal network 9 out of 10 times.
And I'm curious, one thing, Sid, I was curious about is you mentioned like with a crowded market, so to speak. Is that one of those things where, growth kind of solves that problem? Are there other differentiators that folks look out for, and looking at like
Yeah, I
competing
think
solutions?
if you show growth, people will assume you have a differentiated product. And if you don't have growth, people won't believe it. So it doesn't really matter whether you're really differentiated. What matters if you're able to show growing revenue. But probably to have grown that revenue, you probably need a differentiated product. And as a startup, most of the time, it tends to be that you're able to simplify something, that you're able to do something that's quicker. And I don't know how. Like, one wild idea that comes up is like, I've seen Loom becoming extremely popular, both within GitLab and externally. So maybe if you do that video training with Loom, kind of combined with Loom, that might be interesting. Kind of see Loom as a platform to build on top of, like Salesforce is. But that's just a wild idea. But it would be good to have a clear inventory, like explore the whole space, make sure you know about all the companies that are in it, what their feature set is, who they cater to, what they call the thing to begin with.
Yeah.
And then figure out how are you different. And it might be you're based on Loom, or you're cheaper, faster. You do better implementation services. It can be a lot of things.
Okay. I'm curious, when we're building this thing out, and we're working with like a third-party developers out of Pakistan, right? And we're just trying to get things out the door early, like quickly. How does best practices in DevOps and the software development lifecycle play in at this point? Or should we just get stuff out the door quickly and then be willing to rebuild down the road? How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a super hard trade-off. The problem is frequently when you say we'll rebuild down the road, it will be very hard, because down the road, you have customers on this platform, they like what they have. You can't suddenly kind of pull the plug on them and say, oh, now you have to use our 2.0 thing. And by the way, it works different than everything else. So most of the time, the prototype becomes the product. Like frequently it's like, oh, let's first build a prototype. Many times due to time constraints and cost constraints, that becomes the product. And I think, look, I love DevOps. I think you can live without some of the DevOps best practices. You can do them later. I think what's really hard is to introduce code quality later, especially things like choosing the right abstractions, modularity, the data model. It's kind of code is easy, data is hard. So like the data model of your app matters a lot. And if you mess it up at the beginning, it's your future innovation will be more costly. Doesn't mean that there's a lot of examples of startups that outsourced in the beginning that didn't have technical co-founders that became successful. It's certainly possible, but it's tough. It adds an extra complication, and I know a lot of investors are sensitive to it as well.
Thank you. That makes sense. If you were to go, at some point, point us in the right direction to go find somebody to be that technical person or co-founder, where would you point us, or how have you seen that done in the past?
Yeah, without kind of one route is like show revenue growth, get funding, and then work with your investors to bring people to the table. And with funding, you can hire recruiters, and with funding, you have proof that this is a very attractive company, and you can offer like a huge portion of equity and things like that. So that's one route, is get revenue, grow, and get that personal momentum. The alternative to momentum is based on relationship. So it would have been someone that you've been friends with or something like that. That's probably tough because you tend to know people in the same domain as yourself, but do it is the most common alternative route. There's probably more possibilities, but these two come to mind as being common. And the third one is that, so momentum, relationships, or just transform one of the two of you, learn how to code. Like my wife wanted to make a startup, like she couldn't find a technical co-founder, so she taught herself how to code.
How long did that take her?
Probably over a year, but you're already working with with contractors, so that's great. So over time, you hopefully become, it's a gradual process. You can make your first line after the first day, but it's a gradual process.
And Sid, I think in your, and I think it was the last AMA, I think we were talking about like growing, you had mentioned like in the beginning, found out that it turned out to be easier than you thought to grow revenue versus, I think you were saying growing the user base or the community. Downloads. What was kind of the best thing you did for GitLab early on that allowed you to kind of increase or drive revenue up?
I think what made the difference is we started kind of building the features that people were prepared to pay for. But GitLab was different, right? We already had users, we just needed revenue. So we already creating a ton of value, we just needed to capture more of it. This is different. Probably, hey, you'll have probably a free trial for your product or something like that, or something that's limited in the amount of users or videos or something like that. But you'll probably start making money from the beginning. You'll probably have pricing pretty early on. So probably your usage is going to equate to revenue. So probably your problem is attracting users, and it's easier for you to convert them to revenue.
That's the difference between going open source versus going the model that we're essentially going,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Open source is like makes it easier to get the users, but makes it harder to go from users to revenue. So I'll make it open source. Great. Now you have two problems.
I think in the past we was it that did you mention, I must have been an AMA, you must have mentioned something like if I were going to go back, like I would eliminate the free tier. Is that something that I remember you saying?
No, maybe I said it, but I don't remember saying that, and I wouldn't do it. I do think that there's features in the free tier that were like, if I'd go back, some of the features that are now open source wouldn't be open source, because at the time we made those features, we didn't have a proprietary version. So automatically they landed in the open source version. And we would do it different in hindsight. On the other hand, it also led to extra popularity, which also helps.
I mean, it all worked out pretty well.
So far, so good.
And Sid, when you thought about pricing initially, was it simply just comparing what competitors, how they were pricing their products, or how did you start thinking about that early on?
Yeah, look, don't do what I did early on in GitLab. If I advise startups now, do you want pricing to be your differentiation? Then it's like you got to price higher or lower. Most of the time, you want something else to be your differentiation. I don't know, online skill sharing, learning with Loom, so you can, I don't know, be that speaking bubble and do the demo of the product all in line and learn that, which is advanced, right, compared to just talking to the camera. So if that's going to be your differentiation, like why then also innovate on pricing? Then I would kind of mimic the pricing dimension and the pricing of existing solutions, and just have kind of the functionality be the differentiation. With pricing, there's two decisions you have to make. You have to choose the dimension, and you have to choose the height. Both are hard to change, but the dimension is especially hard to change. Going from pricing per user versus pricing per video, prices per certification, pricing per training course, etc. Super hard. I would say, look at what your competitors are doing and then probably price the same way, which is probably per user, but because that's how enterprise customers tend to think, and most enterprise softwares price that, or B2B softwares price that way.
So I know we have a couple minutes. Shawn, if you have anything pressing, you can go ahead. But
Do you have one
I got
more that
something
you
else.
want to, that you think that takes some time? Go for it.
Yeah, I guess I'm just genuinely curious. You've been coaching different companies now, and I'm curious, as you've been coaching companies and, combined with your operator investor experience, like what has become sort of the key advice, or some of the standards that you set for the companies you're coaching? Like, hey, this is the top thing I would recommend you do first and address first in terms of priorities.
Yeah, it changes, right? I think in the beginning, it's describe the company like in a single sentence in a way that's differentiated that people get. Then it's like initial traction, most of the time usage and metrics like that. Then it becomes revenue, and then it tends to become hiring. Although revenue never really leaves.
Cool.
I was just going to ask one little quick question. Actually, it's probably not. I don't think we have enough time. We only got a minute left.
Sure, go ahead. Thanks for being cautious of the time.
Okay, cool. So I know that there's like individual users that come to GitLab, and maybe they're on the community edition, or maybe they even have their own project that they're paying for the additional features. Is that a thought in your mind, or was that a thought in your mind early on to go just purely enterprise, or how do you appeal to the individual, consumer that might use GitLab, or is that something that you even think about, or you just kind of collect those as you go?
I think it's the revenue per user that you can get goes up if you have if the decision maker is higher in the organization. And most of the individual users will be individual contributors in the organization they work for, which means low revenue per user, which kind of means that you're unlikely to make the majority of your money with that. It's unlikely to be important for the monetization. Now, it can be important for the awareness and the marketing and the viral growth and everything else. But I think for an enterprise product, it tends to be you monetize larger groups, larger organizations, higher people higher up in the hierarchy, deciding about the usage of it.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we're at time.
Cool.
Thanks so much, Sid.
Thanks so much, Sid.
Have a good one.